Okay, I'm bringing you this next section of the lesson to wrap up. Just a couple more slides here from my sit spot. And took a minute between sections to just sit and meditate. And I'm really excited to see if you guys are coming up with a really cool sit spot. The benefits of a sit spot are important to this next section where we're about to learn about this chemical called DDT. So how would a sit spot and sitting and meditating have anything to do with DDT? Well, it revolves around this character. Her name is Rachel Carson, and she wrote a book you may have heard of called Silent Spring. It's the classic that launched an environmental movement. So as we learn about different ways that humans impact the environment, you can actually have a really big impact just by observing and noticing your environment. I want to read you a little note from this book, which is kind of cool, Coyote's Guide to Connecting with Nature. And it says here, this is from John Young, The Silence of Frogs. He says, Rachel Carson's book, Silent Spring, was written because as a citizen and scientist, she noticed there were no frogs singing in her neighborhood spring. Why was it that no one else had noticed this? The crisis was not in a remote Brazilian rainforest. DDT's effect was in everyone's backyard, in the vacant lot next door, in the ditches and creeks that kids played in. People didn't notice because they didn't grow up developing the sensory perception and mental search imagery that would make the silence of frogs apparent. So it's just kind of a note to say here, when you sit and you listen and observe your environment, you're much able to detect when a change happens and identify if that change is positive or negative. So let's go in and learn a little bit more about what this DDT chemical was all about. That is the base of this next portion of our lesson here. So here we have DDT. We actually are in sub-Saharan Africa. And here, urban planning and deforestation are not the only ways humans affect their environment. Even the chemicals we use to protect ourselves have an impact. So here it says, DDT is a synthetic compound used as a pesticide in sub-Saharan Africa to control the mosquito population and spread of malaria. It dramatically reduced malaria incidence after its reintroduction in 2004. Use the hotspots to identify the following events that may have occurred at each of the points indicated by the arrows. Okay, so where do you think DDT was introduced? Maybe that's a good place to start. Okay, so the way this is going to go down is that after the development of malaria medication resistance, we're going to start using a different synthetic insecticide. But as that synthetic insecticide starts to, as mosquitoes become resistant to that, the cases are going to spike, right? Because there's going to be more mosquitoes that are able to live and pass on malaria. And so then at the end, when DDT is reintroduced, it actually, again, kills the mosquitoes. There's going to be less cases of malaria. Okay, so let's learn a little bit more. Saving lives or causing harm. While DDT has saved lives in sub-Saharan Africa, it is also highly toxic to birds, fish, and other aquatic life. Until its ban in 1972, DDT was widely used as a pesticide in the United States. In addition to decreasing fish and bird populations in the 60s, DDT also stays in the ecosystem for years. It is ingested by smaller organisms lower in the food chain and is concentrated as the larger organisms in the food chain consume them. And this is something we call biomagnification, going up from the bottom to the top, getting magnified as it goes along. Okay, so given that knowing what it does to the environment, what is your position on using it to protect sub-Saharan Africa? Go ahead and make a conclusion for yourself. So you voted, you used your voice here, and based on the information you're given, To explain your position, choose which arguments below you would use to support your stance for or against it. Select all that imply. So, DDT was proven detrimental or a bad thing to the wildlife and banned in both the US and Sweden in the early 1970s. Malaria was preventable and curable, but the misuse of anti-malarial drugs can cause mosquitoes to build up a resistance to these drugs. Political instability of much of the continent prevents the organization of stable and increased anti-malaria programs. DDT stays in the ecosystem for years. Poverty and lack of resources for much of Africa's population have made it more difficult for people to fight or defend against individual cases of malaria. DDT can prevent millions of deaths. So which of these do you think, if you were for, which ones would you select? Oh, I think that didn't record. Gosh, sorry. So if you were for the use of DDT, or if you were against the use of DDT, you might select these two, because it was banned previously, and it stays in the ecosystem for years. But if you were for the use of DDT, you definitely want to cite that it can prevent millions of deaths, lack of resources, make it difficult. Therefore, if you use this drug, you can decrease the amount of malaria. Okay, so go ahead and select your own answers there. And then we're moving, so we'll pause there.